So let's start off by having you tell us who you are and the country you were in and the years.
Okay, I'm Kerry Cosby. I was in Uzbekistan from 1996 to 1998.
All right. And now tell us a little bit about your background, your family.
Okay.
Where are you from?
I'm from Oklahoma, right? Born and raised. I'm 51 years old today, so 1973 was when I was born. Yeah.
Oh, well, happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's an honor to have you here today on your birthday.
Thank you. So my family, my parents are both from Stratford, Oklahoma, tiny town, I think 1,500 people. They moved, my father was raised on the farm, my mother was raised in town. They moved off the, out of the town and into the city, here up into the Oklahoma City area. And so I was raised in Moore, Oklahoma. And then went to OU, got a degree in English and minor in psychology. So that's kind of who I am generally.
What did your parents do?
My father was a MISO. That is something at Tinker Air Force Base, and we had no idea what it was, but the name had just enough mystery to it that we never even thought to ask for more, right? Because we always thought, all right, well, this is somebody doing some clandestine things. In truth, he was in I guess it was inter-service operations, right? That's the ISO in it. I'm not sure what the M is, maybe management. But he was working in programs with different services and bringing things to to Tinker Air Force Base. My mom worked at Dillard's department store for a long time. We followed her into Dillard's. Both my sister and I both worked at Dillard's while we were going to school, both high school and college.
Oh, very good.
So yeah,
Was there anybody in your family or your friends when you were in high school or when you were in college who brought up Peace Corps to you?
So friends, no. When I was graduating college, I was a little bit burnt out. I was planning on going on for my PhD, which I didn't end up going for.
When did you get your lower degree in?
I got my degree. My bachelor's degree is in English.
Okay, yeah.
My master's is in Central Eurasian Studies, which is basically studying where I went for Peace Corps. But yeah, so I was about to finish college, and I was burnt out, but I was wanting to do something in the world before I went for my graduate degree. And I knew I was going for some sort of graduate degree. I figured it was going to be a PhD. And my father was driving with me one day. I honestly can't tell you where it was too, but we were talking about this, and he said, well, why don't you take some time and serve your country in the Peace Corps?
He said that? Just like that?
My father said that, yeah.
Wow.
And I hadn't thought about it. It hadn't crossed my mind at all, but at that moment it made sense, right? It was something that I could do. It was something where I could make a difference in the world. And so I thought, okay, well, let's try this. I'll be honest with you, the only reason I knew about your things, my father too, right? My father, he watches these things. He saw it in the newspaper, and he said, well, you've got to go do this. This is something important. So, but yeah, so he told me that I needed to do this, or that it would be good for me to do this, and I loved the idea. And so I started to apply for it. Did
you have some notion of what Peace Corps was when he said that?
I'll be honest, I only knew, what was it, Joe versus the Volcano, the movie that came out with Tom Hanks?
Yes.
Or Volunteers.
Like
Volunteers is the one, yes. Where it was him and John Candy. That was all I knew of the Peace Corps. And if it were that situation, that wouldn't be a good idea.
No, it wouldn't. I wouldn't have followed those guys anywhere.
And the thing is, I'm not even sure how I looked it up. I know we were looking it up. We didn't have much internet back then.
No.
But I think probably maybe either a friend had it, or I looked it up online at the university because I know the university had internet. We didn't really have it. So I must have found out something from there, I would guess. I don't remember going to a recruiter. I know a lot of people you talk to have talked about going to recruiters. I don't remember talking to a single recruiter.
Well, the recruiters at that time, I think, were located in Dallas.
That's where I had to do my interview. So definitely there was somebody down there.
But anyway, as far as you can remember, you never saw any recruiters at OU.
I never did. But then again, I was not on campus very often, right? I would go down from my classes and then I would come off because I didn't live on campus.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what year was it that your dad mentioned Peace Corps?
That would be probably late 1995 would be my guess. Right? Because it probably took me a while to get through the system. And I didn't get my answer from the Peace Corps until I think maybe April or May, something like that.
Of 96?
Of 96. And then I had to leave in July, so I had a very short turnaround between that. So yeah, it had to have been like late 95.
Did you talk to anybody in that period of time before you applied, or as you were applying? Did you talk to any returned Peace Corps volunteer?
No, because I didn't know anybody in Oklahoma that had done it. I didn't know anybody who did it. We didn't have those kind of connections. Now you can find it easily somewhere, right? You can just contact an RPCV group and ask questions. We didn't have that opportunity back then.
I don't know that there are any RPCV groups in Oklahoma anymore. There used to be, and I was in one, Central Oklahoma RPCVs. But it kind of, little by little, just sort of petered out.
I think they're mostly online now. Because I know I am connected to the RPCV, the National RPCV group. And then, of course, we've got Peace Corps Uzbekistan that keeps us up to date. Anybody has information about Uzbekistan, they'll put it on there. Or when they're looking for somebody. And there was somebody this weekend who was looking for a Peace Corps volunteer that they had worked with. It was one of their counterparts in Uzbekistan, so they were asking about that. So that's pretty much how we keep in contact anymore. It's online.
Okay. Were there any of your friends or any family members who found out what you were going to do and said, "Oh no, you're wasting your time. Don't do that"?
No, strangely enough, my entire family was supportive of this.
Friends too?
Yeah, I mean, they thought I was a little bit strange going on these things because nobody knew where Uzbekistan was. Right? It's this place in the middle of nowhere. We pretty much had to say, well, former Soviet Union, because then they could tell. I had lots of people that I would say, I'm going to Uzbekistan, and they'd say, East Pakistan? Right? It was such a new country. It had become new 4 years before I actually went there. Right? So prior to that, it was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you applied. When you applied, I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of RPCVs who said they had a choice, who said that they were presented with, well, what continent do you want? What country do you want? What was your experience?
There was a saying in Uzbekistan. All of the Uzbekistan volunteers, we would all say to each other, no geographical preference. That's how you got put into Uzbekistan. Because I was told, or found out somehow, I can't remember how, but somehow or another I found out that it was easier to get in if you did not specifically say, I want to be here. And I knew that I just wanted to be in Peace Corps. I didn't care where. Granted, I spoke Spanish, and so I wanted to go down to Latin America, but I felt that if I did that, there'd be a chance that I wouldn't be able to go. So I did.
That doesn't make sense. That's just contraindicated, I think.
It's just so many people speak Spanish, and so many people want to go to Latin America.
In Peace Corps?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's even still today, right?
So you'd have all this competition?
Right.
Oh,
Whereas,
I see.
as the former Soviet Union, nobody knew that it existed, the Peace Corps there. So I'm pretty sure nobody was saying that they'd like to go there. Actually, no, let me change that. I had a few people in my group that they had studied the area in their undergrad. And so they probably did ask to go. But the vast majority of us were no geographical preference.
What did you think you had to offer?
I mean,
Not just Uzbekistan, but any country in the Peace Corps.
well, because I studied English, it's very easy to go into the Peace Corps with an English degree.
You knew
Because
that?
they need so many English teachers, right? Yeah.
Did you know that? I didn't know that.
Really?
I went in. No.
Yeah, somehow or another I must have read it. But yeah, the biggest, I think the first thing that the Peace Corps does when they go into a country is they offer English and business.
Yeah.
Those are the two big ones that they offer. And so I knew that they needed a lot of English studies people, and so that would be my way in.
Were you thinking to yourself that if I get in, I can, this is a great thing for these people because I can teach them English, and that will probably improve their lives. If not right away, maybe eventually. Were you thinking along those lines, or were you?
I would say partly. At the same time, I was thinking of what it would give me.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And they tell you, if you're going in there just to serve other people, because we get so frustrated. I don't know if this was your experience, but everybody gets so frustrated that if you're just trying to give, then you're going to leave. And so there really was a need to have this desire also to take from that country, to learn something from that country. And I'll be honest with you, that was probably my biggest desire, was to learn from the country rather than just to give English language knowledge.
Oh, I think that's true for most of us.
Yeah.
I've never, in fact, it's very rare that I've ever heard a RPCV say that they gave more than they got.
It's impossible because you're one person and you've got all of these people around you that are constantly supporting you, constantly, giving you information, showing you a completely new culture. And so how in the world can we give more than they do?
Yeah.
Right?
So let's see. Peace Corps has changed the way they've done things over the years. But was it true for you that you went after you were accepted, and you said you were accepted in April?
It had to have been somewhere around April or May. It was a really fast turnaround before I had to leave.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had an interview in Dallas?
Had an interview in Dallas.
April, maybe?
Probably somewhere around there, maybe March. I remember I had classes that day. And so because I was planning to go to that interview, and I had no idea what to expect. So I was wearing my suit that I would normally wear when I went to work at Dillard's. And so I'm sitting there in the middle of the English department on the floor in this suit, and one of my professors comes over and it's like, what in the world are you doing in a suit? I mean, that doesn't happen. Nobody wears a suit in the English department.
Yeah.
So I said, right after my class, I've got to go down to Dallas and I've got to do my interview. And I'll be honest with you, the fact that I was wearing a suit, I think, freaked out the interviewer too. Right, Peace Corps volunteers don't wear suits.
Don't wear suits, no.
So he looked at me pretty strange when I came out with my suit on.
How long was your interview, and tell me a little about it.
Well, that's one that I can't tell you much about, to tell you the truth. I remember getting there. I remember the guy making statements about my suit. I remember him, well, I'll be honest with you, I don't think he thought I would be a good, by looking at the way that he reacted to me, it didn't seem like he thought I would be a good fit for the Peace Corps. So when I left, when I got back, I told my family that I didn't think I made it. But somehow or another, I guess maybe something I had said gave him the idea that I would be good for this. But I'll be honest with you, I don't remember a thing that happened in that.
Including what you said.
I don't remember a word that I said. I don't remember what he asked or anything.
I'm wondering though, Kerry, if you thought to yourself before you got there, you rehearsed and you thought to yourself, I've got to make this point and this point and this point.
No, because I had no idea what I was really getting into. I didn't have any idea what they were going to be asking me. But I know that I was nervous, and I'm pretty sure that's why I forgot every single thing that I answered, was because I was so nervous going down there and doing this, because I wanted it so much.
And you wanted it so much after the interview, but you thought maybe I blew it?
Oh yeah, I absolutely thought I blew it. I came back, 3-hour drive back to Moore, Oklahoma, went over to my parents' house, and I said, I don't think I got it. But yeah, after a couple of months, I got the letter, and so when I got the letter, I'm probably jumping ahead. And
Go right ahead.
So I was headed off to work one morning, and it was like Saturday morning. I had finished classes for the week, and I was headed off to work. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll drop by and I'll see if I've gotten anything in the mail. And I opened it up, pulled out this big Peace Corps thing, and I'll be honest, my hands started shaking. I wasn't sure whether I even wanted to open it. I was afraid that it was going
this is my future right here.
So I open this thing up, and it tells me that I'm going to Uzbekistan. And at that point, I'm like, where in the world is Uzbekistan? What is Uzbekistan?
Exactly. I would have said the same thing.
So I was a wreck. Drove all the way up to Dillard's at Crossroads Mall, which I was in Norman. I was living in Norman at the time, so it took me like 30 minutes or something to get up there. Finally got up there. My mom, since she worked there also, I told her about it. She was excited. And then I talked to the people who were in the electronics department. Now, we didn't have internet, but our electronics department had Encarta. I don't know if you remember Encarta.
I don't remember.
They started doing the electronic version of the encyclopedia. And it only lasted for a short period of time because all of us got the internet after that. But we looked up Uzbekistan on that
right there in Dillard's.
Right there in Dillard's. And so that was how I found out what in the world it was that I was going to.
Boy, what'd you think? Were you attracted by that?
It was wild. It was well, first of all, I mean, you think of the Soviet Union, right, at that time. And you don't think of anything but Russia. We all were raised with the idea of Ivan Drago fighting against Rocky in Rocky, what was it, Rocky 3?
Yeah, I think it was.
And so that was what we thought of as Russia. And you never thought to yourself, okay, well, there's an entire group of other ethnic groups that are down there. And this one was a Muslim republic, right? Okay, we didn't think that there were any Muslims in the Soviet Union.
No.
Everybody was atheist there. They were all communists. This idea that anybody could be anything different than blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and just this, Soviet man, we had no idea that was. So when I found out they were different than that, I thought, this is incredibly interesting. So I was much more excited even after looking at what Uzbekistan was, once I found out what Uzbekistan was.
So you were positively impacted by what you saw.
Oh, absolutely.
Not negatively.
No, absolutely. It was interesting. It was a mystery, right? This place was a mystery. I'd never heard of it. Periodically, I'll think of it this way. At the time, we were looking for our authentic selves, and we thought, okay, well, in the crumbling Soviet Union, there is the authentic, and by finding something that was different, new, which Uzbekistan and the people that were there were new to me, and so I thought that was something that was intriguing. It was the newness, the fact that I knew nothing about it. And I thought it was even better than if I had gone to Latin America. I'd been studying Spanish for a long time, had an idea about Latin America. But here it was a blank
slate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when were you? It was around April. You said that you were accepted, and then you flew out in July.
Yeah, we had staging in Chicago.
Tell me what staging was.
So staging is, I think we only had 1 day there. I think sometimes they have it between 1 and 3 days. We only did 1 day in Chicago, if I remember correctly.
How many were you?
We were about 50, I think,
From
at that point.
People from all over the country?
All over the country, yeah. So 50 of us showed up there. 50 of us were in the group talking to each other, telling what we were expecting out of this. And then the next day, pretty much, we got on a plane and left.
For where?
Pardon?
For where?
For Tashkent. We had to go through Istanbul, and then from Istanbul we flew into Tashkent. So we spent, I think it was about a half a day in Istanbul. I became a millionaire while I was in Istanbul. I changed my money, and they were still using the old Turkish lira, and so I had to buy a hamburger, and became a millionaire as soon as I changed my money. I was excited about that.
Oh boy. So, and then you got to Tashkent.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I would always pronounce it Tashkent, but it's Tashkent.
The way that it's spelled these days is Toshkent. The Soviet way, the Russian way, is with an A, but the Uzbek way is to spell it Toshkent. So yeah, Tashkent.
Okay.
But yeah, we got into Tashkent.
What size city is that?
It's fairly large. Most of the population of Uzbekistan is in Tashkent.
Okay.
It is the, well, let's put it this way. So the largest bazaar that was there, it's not there anymore, it was the Hippodrome. Every single day, about 2 million people would come into that bazaar.
Good Lord.
Right? So that's just a bazaar.
Wow.
And they would come from all over Central Asia to it. So Tashkent,
like a market, right?
Yeah. So Tashkent itself was fairly large. It was a big city, big Soviet city. Had collapsed in the 1960s because of a huge earthquake, and so the Soviet Union rebuilt it in the 1960s. But we arrived there. It had to have been late at night, probably around 2 in the morning or so. It's dark. We land on the tarmac. The first thing that we see is a row of men in military uniform with Kalashnikovs in their hands.
Ooh.
First time I'd ever seen a Kalashnikov, and the fact that it was there while I was getting off a plane was a little frightening. They put us onto what we kept calling a cattle car, right? It was this little trailer that we were in, and they would pull us off the tarmac behind a truck up to the terminal. And the terminal itself was incredibly dark, and the name Kafka and word Kafkaesque was being bantied between each of the Peace Corps volunteers.
Yeah.
Because it was just the strangest thing we had ever seen in our lives. And it's not like it anymore. I've been back there several times since. But back then, because it was just after the Soviet Union had fell, because the republics were struggling for money, well, they didn't have the kind of money to put into their airports that they do now. Now Uzbekistan the airport's a hub for flying anywhere from Europe into Southeast Asia. So it's completely different situation now. But yeah, back then it was very Soviet. We all got in a semblance of a line. Uzbekistan is not known for its lines. It's usually just spread out somewhere, and then of course you've got all these Peace Corps volunteers, and so we're just kind of jumbled up there, and we gradually work our way through this very dark border patrol, not knowing the language. We knew, they gave us a list of a few words that we should learn, and so they would ask us something, and say ha, right, which is yes.
Being agreeable.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, it was a very interesting situation. And then from there we went to the Chorsu Hotel. So the Chorsu Hotel is a former Soviet hotel, right? Very Soviet. High rise, yeah. Was kind of crumbling even back then. I don't even know that it's there anymore. I think they knocked it down. It was right beside the Chorsu Market, which is one of the older markets. Chorsu itself means crossroads. It's literally means four waters. And so we were right there by the Chorsu Market. We got to the Chorsu Hotel somewhere around maybe 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh boy.
Finally got to our room somewhere around 5, so we were not sleeping. I was put in a room with this guy Graham, who became a great friend of mine, still is a great friend of mine. And we started talking a little bit, trying to share our impressions of what we had seen. And then all of a sudden we hear the azan, the call to prayer. And I don't know if you've ever been in a place that has the call to prayer, but
No.
it is the most beautiful thing you've ever heard in your life. I lived there, and I lived in Azerbaijan, and that's one of the things that I miss about being there. So that we all of a sudden heard the call to prayer, and both of us were just like, "This is amazing." And then, because it was right at the time that the sun was coming up, so we looked out of our room and down onto the bazaar, and so all of these people are headed into the bazaar, getting ready for their day, bringing their wares, bringing their food, and that was really our first introduction to Uzbekistan outside of this Soviet airport.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Wow, what a contrast. It's Soviet, dark, dank airport, and then this call to prayer
It was
with
amazing.
color and everything.
Yeah.
Movement.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing is that after a while of being in there, that call to prayer was really quietened. The government of Uzbekistan decided that they didn't want it to be so loud, and so they stopped I can't remember whether they told them you can only turn the speakers up to a certain amount, or whether they said you can't use amplifiers anymore.
Oh,
So at some point, the sound of the call to prayer just kind of disappeared.
while you were there?
While I was there, the government at some point was really, really scared of Islam.
Attracting Taliban and
This was
whatever.
this was right around there. They had the IMU at the time, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, which began as a normal political movement, but then gradually radicalized, and then became a part of the groups that were working with the Taliban. And so they did start doing terrorism in the area. And so Uzbekistan was very concerned about Islam at that time, and so they tried to push it down a little bit, which is a sad thing in my opinion. And I think it's been changed since then. I think the last time I was there was this last year, and I actually did get to hear the call to prayer. Granted, I was closer, but
what made it so beautiful?
I don't know. I mean, it's sung, right? The way that the call to prayer is
beautiful, a beautiful voice singing.
It's a man's voice.
A man's voice,
right?
Yeah, it would be a man.
Lots of times, what they'll do. So across the Muslim world, we'll call it that. Across the Muslim world, there are people who are known for their ability to do the call to prayer as a beautiful beautiful art, and it is an art. And so lots of times, I think what they would do is, in Uzbekistan, is they would pipe in the call to prayer of one of these famous people. So it wouldn't always be a person who was actually there. It would be a recorded thing of these, beautiful singing of the call to prayer.
How long does this last?
Not very long.
A minute or
a minute
5
or
minutes?
two. It's very short.
Very short.
Yeah. But it was really loud at that time, and so that can also be a problem, especially early in the morning if you don't want to hear it.
If you're not ready for...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a great first impression that you had then.
It was.
One side and then diametrically the opposite almost.
Yeah.
On the first day.
Yeah. No, it was amazing.
Wow. So how long were you in Tashkent?
We spent in Tashkent, that's a good question. I want to say it couldn't have been more than a few days. We got our inoculations, right? We had to all go through the shots. A battery of something like 10 shots. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was an
Sounds
enormous
right.
number. And then we did just kind of an introduction to the city, introduction to the culture, and then we were pushed off to Gulistan, which Gulistan was our training site.
Where did you stay in Tashkent? In that hotel?
Just in the hotel, yeah. The entire time we were in that hotel, they had a room for us to do, the inoculations and the cultural information. And then, of course, they took us around the city. We obviously went into the Chorsu Bazaar, because the bazaars in Uzbekistan at that time were a major portion of people's lives. Mm-hmm. Right? That's where you got your food. That's where you got your clothing. You really didn't go to the stores that were there. They were much fewer. In the Soviet Union, you had Sum and you had Gum, right, which were the central universal store mall. And the Gum, which was the governmental store. And so people mostly didn't go to those. What they did is they went to the bazaar. And so introduction to the bazaar was an incredibly important thing for us in those first days, so that we'd understand how you talk to people in the bazaar, what you could get there, what types of bazaars there were, that kind of thing. So it was incredibly important that we went there. But then we also went to the various sites in the city, like the central area, which would be the statue of the Emir Timur, Tamerlane, he was their main, this is the guy. If you want to talk about Uzbekistan, you talk about Tamerlane. Although you normally don't call him that, he would be an Emir Timur. And so,
was he a prophet?
No, he was a conqueror. He conquered most of Asia and got into the Ottoman Empire and even threatened the Ottoman Empire.
When was this that he was?
14th century, 1355, I think, somewhere around there. So yeah, he really...
Was he like the George Washington of...
Not exactly, not exactly. If you want the George Washington, then that would be much later. The first president of Uzbekistan, which was in the early 20th century. But no, he was more along the lines of, he was a conqueror. He conquered a huge area. He was not... So at the time you had the Khans, right? So the Khans were incredibly important in Central Asia, and they were the rulers. Emir Timur was not he was not related to any of the Khans, but he was so powerful that he was able to take the power of Central Asia and basically use that and take it away from the Jochid Khans, which the Jochids were a lineage of them. And so he took the power away from them and was able to expand his empire all across Asia.
Okay. You were there for a few days, and then...
In Tashkent, yeah. Then we went to Gulistan.
How far is that? And what size is it?
So it took us about probably 2, maybe 3 hours to get to Gulistan.
On a bus?
Yeah, we were all put on a bus and we were taken over there. Now, that doesn't mean that it's far away. The roads were not the best. You had to constantly go very slowly. And so it probably was honestly really close. But it was a longer drive. I think now it'd probably take you, because there are highways, it'll take you maybe about 30, 45 minutes to get there, but it wasn't quite that when we were there the last time.
Why did you go there?
that was our training site. So we were learning, since I was in the English group, I was learning how to teach English as a foreign language and learning the language of Uzbek. And then, of course, we had the business volunteers, and they were learning how to work with a local counterpart for business. Now, also, they were learning, I think, to teach. My friend was in that group, so I don't exactly know, but I think they were also being told, you guys might be teaching some business. They were specifically working with junior achievement when they were teaching business in schools.
Junior achievement.
Yeah, Junior Achievement is a non-profit organization here in the United States that works
Well, I've
with
heard of
schools.
it, but I didn't imagine that it was in that country.
Oh yeah, no, they spread, and the Peace Corps was helping them spread their activities. So most of our business volunteers were at least spending some time teaching at schools doing Junior
Teaching
Achievement.
English or teaching business?
That's a good question too. My friend John, he was in a village, and so the knowledge of English in the schools was not quite the level that one could teach a business class in.
Yeah.
He ended up teaching English most of the time, but he was sent there to...
Because you had to have a fundamental understanding of English before you could understand business.
Yeah. Now, if you were in a bigger city, then you probably were able to do the actual business teaching. But yeah, they were trying to send more of us out of the bigger cities into the towns and the villages. I was in a town, he was in a village. His was tiny. I mean, it was a very, very small village. So yeah, they did...
A few hundred people?
I'd say probably, that's about right.
Yeah. So,
Oh, I didn't tell you the size of Gulistan.
no.
So Gulistan probably had about 30,000 people in it, 30 to 50,000 people. So it was a mid-sized city. It wasn't major, but it was a small one.
Were any of you going to be assigned to Gulistan?
There were a couple of people, I think, who ended up being in Gulistan. The person who was there, we were assigned host families while we were in Gulistan. 1 month, I think, 3 months we were in Gulistan doing our training.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were assigned to host families that we stayed in. And so the person who stayed in Gulistan, I believe he either stayed in his family or transferred to one of the families of the other volunteers. But yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, so the rest of us then were just kind of thrown throughout the country after that.
During that 3 months staying with a host family, was it just you and the host family?
It was. Yeah, I was with my host mother. I was put with not an Uzbek family, but an Armenian family. So I was learning Uzbek, but my host family didn't speak any Uzbek. They all spoke Russian. I know, so I had a Russian dictionary, and my host mother and I would spend most of our time with that Russian dictionary.
God.
She spoke a little bit of English, a tiny bit. She was a history teacher at the local school. Her two sons, Vartan and Samson, they were, one was I think about maybe 10 or 11 years old, and the other one was somewhere around 8. And they were my little buddies. Right? I'd come home and they'd hang out with me, and then she'd come home from work, and then we'd talk for the evening. She had friends that would come over, Yuldus. And then I made a friend of my neighbor downstairs, a Russian girl, Yula. She was in the local medical school, I think is what she was studying. She was studying to be a nurse. So, yeah, I made friends with them.
You made friends despite this language gap.
Yeah, well, Yuna, she could speak English very well.
Oh, well.
And so she helped a lot. Vartan did a pretty good job with his English.
Who's Vartan?
Vartan was my host brother in there.
Okay.
And then Emma, his mother, spoke almost no English. And so we were really, I was having to struggle with whatever Russian word I might know, or I'd throw the Uzbek word that I would know, or hope that it was some sort of a cognate. But yeah, It was fun. It was interesting.
It was frustrating too, wasn't
It
it?
was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
That's
Because there wasn't any answer to this. I mean, here you are. You can't. It's too late now to prepare.
Yeah, there was no way I could be prepared for this. But the thing is, you know when you're going to Peace Corps that you're going to be put into some strange situations. And we spent 2 years in strange situations, right? That's pretty much how it
But
was.
it's not the same strange situation.
It's
for 2
always
years.
changing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, the person close to the end of our time in Gulistan, we had to be interviewed by the director of the program. And the director of the program was, asking me about my time there, and I was like, no, everything's fine. So she told her assistant, Zoya, who then later became the director of the program, she said, this guy's not going to make it. Simply because I didn't have anything I was going to gripe about to her.
Completely unprepared for this.
But I made it the whole way through.
Oh, yeah, I guess you found out during this time where you were going to be and exactly what you were going to be doing, who you might be living with even?
Yes. By the end of it, I think November is probably when we found out where we were going to be going. We met our counterparts. Our counterparts are the teachers that we would work with teaching classes.
In where you were going?
Yes, and I went to...
So they came in
we
to
met,
meet you?
I want to say that we met either in Gulistan or in Tashkent. I can't remember exactly where. And then we would go down with them on the train to the place that we were supposed to be going.
That's good.
Yeah, we were headed down to the Bukhara district. It was me, my friend John, and my friend Scott. We were going to be headed down there. So we met our counterparts, and then we got on the train, and the counterparts would sit there. They were sitting there talking to us while we were on the train. I am not a talkative person. I'm an incredibly quiet person. And so I kind of sat there. John, on the other hand, is the life of the party. Yeah. Everybody loves John, right? He's funny, he's smart, he's constantly talking, and he can get you to talk about anything. My host mother and my counterpart, they're the same person, wanted him. She didn't want me. I didn't say...
This guy who's just sitting there? No.
She thought, how in the world are we going to do anything if this guy doesn't say anything? So yeah, she was hoping that she could get John, but she didn't. She got me. But the thing is, we became best friends, my host mother and I.
Oh, that's great.
We worked with each other every single day. You're not supposed to live with your counterpart. That was a rule with Peace Corps, at least there. But somehow or another, I got the ability to do that, and it was great. We would, we'd talk to each other. We spent most of our time, I would speak Uzbek, she would speak English. We tried to make it this way as much as possible so that both of us gained from this. And we were working together all day long. Then we'd come home. I'd help with things around the house. And she taught students.
So you weren't supposed to be living with her, but you were.
But I did, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we were doing our lesson planning in the evening up until around 10 o'clock at night, and then she had to go watch her shows. And I went and read, because I was not going to watch. She was watching the shows in Russian, and obviously I didn't know Russian at all. So she'd go in there with my host father, and they would go watch the shows, but we would work up until then. Unfortunately, we were workaholics. But it worked out really well. Yeah, she did not want me at the beginning. She wanted John.
Let me ask this question. You said there were about 50 of you.
Yes.
Initially. How many made it through Gulistan?
Through Gulistan?
Yeah. How many were still in Peace Corps at that point?
I would say we lost at least 5 by the end of the 3 months.
Now, another question.
Yeah.
Were any of them, use this word that you may not have heard before, deselected?
No, we didn't have that.
But you know what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nobody was deselected, and that would normally be well, I mean, wouldn't be in training, right?
It would be.
Huh.
Well, at least it was in
Most
my
of them
time.
left. Yeah, most of them left. They were just, it didn't work out for them. One guy was missing, his family, his girlfriend. He wanted to go back for that reason.
Yeah.
There was another woman who just, it wasn't for her, so she left. By the end, there was one of the older volunteers. She was having a really hard time learning the language, and so she didn't, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
We had so many people leave, I have no idea when exactly they left. In total, we were cut by about half by the end.
Really? So
Yeah.
of the 50, only about 25 advanced to
of us
their
left.
assignments.
No, by the end of the time.
Oh,
so
the
we
2
had
years?
Gradually, people would drop out over the 2 years, but only 25 or so of us made it to our COS conference, the close of service conference. There was about 25 of us there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
it was a rough spot, right? Uzbekistan, because it was new, because it was different. It was tough. I was ill for 2 years.
Ill?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I had amoebas. I had giardia several times. There were days that I was just doubled over in my room. So all of us lost tons of weight.
Even the women?
The women, some of them did, some of them did not. All of the men absolutely did. There was one guy who lost about 35 pounds. I lost somewhere around 20. I went from about 160 pounds to 140 pounds. And I didn't have much to lose, to tell you the truth, in the beginning, but somehow or another it went.
Yeah. Now, was this from drinking the water?
The thing is, we didn't drink the water much, but when you've got soup, that soup is not boiled quite enough. When you've got tea that might not have been boiled the full 10 minutes that it needed to be boiled, then yeah, it's going to come through that. But it's not necessarily drinking directly from the water, because we never did that.
In the town that you were assigned to, did you have a municipal water supply?
We did.
You could turn on a faucet and the water would come out?
Not exactly. So outside of my house, for some strange reason, always had water coming out. There was a little pipe that was lower than, I think, most of the area around there, and so water was always pouring into that pipe. So we always had water. Our neighbors did not have water. It didn't come into our house. It only came into that pipe down there. And so we were able to get water from that pipe, so we always had water. But all of our neighbors did not, so our neighbors were constantly knocking on our door requesting to come and get water from our pipe. Yeah.
But so you had the runs for 2 years? Is that right?
Yeah, basically.
So did I.
Yeah.
That's how I know.
It was rough.
I went from 170 to 135.
Yeah, so you lost way more than me, but yeah. 20 pounds was quite enough for me to lose. It was rough.
Anyway, you did any of the PCVs leave because they were just sick and that tired of being sick all the time?
Yeah, there were lots of them that left for that reason. Right? There were people who were medevaced and just decided not to come back.
Oh.
And then there were people who they just were, it was being sick all the time was too difficult for them. And the interesting thing is that when I go back now, I guess over the years you start to develop a tolerance for some of the bugs that are in the water.
Probably.
I go back now and there's no problem whatsoever. Right? I lived in Azerbaijan for 7 years, maybe 8 years, and never had problems there either. Right? So I think just over time you start to get used to these things. But we weren't, and so yeah, some people were ill and just they decided they couldn't handle it anymore, and so they left.
Were
There was also pressure.
Were any of your Peace Corps friends who were talking about leaving, did you try to persuade them to stay?
We did, specifically the people who left during training. My site, we didn't have anybody leave. Scott, me, and John, we were the only people in the site, and none of us left. We lasted the entire time. So we didn't have anybody who was around us who was specifically trying to want to go home. But during training, that's when we had people who were, they were missing home, etc. And we did try to, convince them, okay, we'll just stick it out a little bit longer, see what you can do. But if they wanted to go, you had to let them go. There was no reason for them to stay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think Peace Corps did enough for them?
I think so. We all had our gripes about Peace Corps.
Oh, sure.
Let's put it. I mean, our group was the poorest of all of the groups in Central Asia.
What do you mean poorest?
Because we were in Bukhara, all of the people from the other countries would come and visit our area, and so we met all of the Peace Corps volunteers from all the different areas, and they were telling us how much money they got, and we were making a tiny amount. I think we made like $40 per month, and after a while, yeah. And the thing is, we had hyperinflation by the end of the time that we were there, but our money was tied to the official amount, the official exchange rate, and so that hyperinflation ate up the amount of money that we were getting. Yeah, we were incredibly poor.
So you didn't have any money to buy anything?
No, we would get a Fanta or a Coke, maybe a beer, and that was about it.
Gosh.
Yeah, we loved candy, lots of chocolate, because that we could afford.
Boy. So you started work in your school. Tell me about first of all, I don't think I've given you the opportunity to introduce us to your new town, your assignment.
Okay. I was in Galosio. Galosio is a small town. It's like the regional center just outside of Bukhara. Bukhara is the main city in the region.
Okay.
Bukhara is 2,500 years old. Beautiful old city. And then there's this little town that was built up outside of it, which was kind of a Soviet town. It had, I'm going to say, somewhere around 15,000 people in it. It was very small. It was nice. Our roads were a lot of the times just dirt. I do remember walking to school when it was raining or snowing, and I would just have a massive buildup of mud on my shoes. Very different now, but that's how it was. And I would walk, my host mother and I would get up in the morning and we'd go walk to the school, which was, 15, 20 minutes away each day in, day out, whether it was cold, whether it wasn't. And once you get into the school, the cold doesn't go away. There's no heating in any of these schools.
Oh, wow.
So you are in your coat and sometimes gloves, and you feel bad because these poor kids have to sit there and try to write in this. But yeah, it was incredibly cold.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything you could do about that?
No. The heaters there were these old radiators, and the water just wasn't coming through and wasn't being heated, so there was no way to heat these rooms. It was completely impossible. And then, of course, there was no insulation.
Well, if it's impossible in your mind, then it's off the table.
Yeah, no, you just live
So
it.
you didn't
just
worry about, I'm supposed to be helping here and I'm not helping.
There was no way to heat these schools whatsoever.
Why would your host mother walk you to school?
Because we were both teaching. She was my teaching partner, and so we would both just walk over to school together because we had to be at our class.
And you did your lesson plans together,
yeah,
right?
We did our lesson plans.
But you had two distinct classes. She taught one and you taught another? Or
No.
did you team teach?
We would team teach. Now, in truth, I had 4 counterparts. My main one was Mavluda, and that was my host mother. Then there was another Mavluda that I worked with. She was also one that I team taught with. Then there was Saida, and there was Zubaida. So I worked with all of the teachers pretty much in the English department. I think there was one of them that was not. She taught the younger kids. I taught from 7th grade to 11th grade, and with each of those grades I would teach with a different teacher. So pretty much I was teaching all day long.
Wow.
They gave me the class as much as possible, right? Mavluda and I would work, Mavluda and I mostly would work out our lesson plans, and we would do those. The others, Zubaida would work with me on lesson plans a little bit. The other ones were they would give me the ability to make the lesson plans on my own, and very often I'd use them across the different classes. But we worked very close together to make them and to teach the classes.
Mm-hmm.
She would explain in Uzbek if we needed, but we tried to do as much in English as possible.
And you would make lesson plans every night?
Every night.
There wasn't a time where you'd wake up and you'd say, I'm going to wing it today.
I couldn't. I had my counterpart right there, and she wanted to make certain that everything was right. And we were trying something new. This was not how they taught, right? What they normally taught was you'd go through the book, and you would teach the students to memorize the language, memorize the text, and that was kind of the Soviet way of teaching. Let me put it this way. Every Uzbek Uzbek volunteer or Uzbekistan volunteer had heard at least 100 times, my family is not so very big. We have my mother, my father, my sister, my brothers, and I am. Right? It's the exact same wording. My father is an engineer, my mother is a teacher. Now, we knew that their families were not these things, but they had memorized them. And so that's kind of how a lot of the teaching was done. My counterparts really wanted to try something new. And so we were doing whole language learning. And so we would learn the words, we'd learn how to talk about them, they would listen to me talk about them, and we would learn the grammar. And so we built off that. Yeah, so every day we had to work on our plans.
Were you defying the system then?
It's not as though the school was telling us don't do this. They were very happy that we were doing it.
Oh, okay.
But it was really different. And the way that I tested was really different. In the former Soviet Union, lots of times when you test your students, what you'll do is you'll have them take a paper and they have to talk about whatever is on that paper.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a memorized text, then they'll just state that text. Whereas I was teaching and testing, I would write out all of my tests for every single one of the students, 30 different tests on paper, so that they had to fill them out. And I had 2 or 3 different versions that I was using. My students loved to cheat. One of the main words that I learned was shpargalka, which is basically a cheat sheet. And so
it has the answers on it?
They would write down in just tiny little letters everything that they could think of, that would be on a test.
Yeah.
Right? And I'd prepare them, right? I'd tell them what was kind of going to be on there. So they'd write down on these little papers. And one person, I think he even wrote it on the bottom of a chair at one point. So I had several different versions, so that it made it much more difficult to cheat. And we would grade them based on what percentage of answers they got right. And this was not something that was normal there. It was normally done by the speech. You'd get up and you'd say this thing. If you said it right, then you got whatever grade it was you got.
But they didn't have the impression that you came in and changed things.
No, because they wanted to do this. They were ecstatic about doing something new.
I mean the students.
Oh no,
I mean-
the students just wanted anything they could possibly get. I mean, these students were absorbing everything. Most of my students would spend as much time standing around me asking questions, even the most improper questions you can think of, just to get me to speak to them in English too.
What would some improper
They would look up words in the dictionary, and it was very often
They'd say, "What does this
inappropriate
mean?"
words.
Oh.
And I'd be like, guys, you can't do that.
How did they know? It takes a certain level of advancement to even know what's
I
improper.
had some very good English speakers.
Must have.
At least 3 of my students came to the United States on exchange programs. And it wasn't because of me, right? I didn't do it. When I got there, these kids, they had all of my teachers that I worked with, they were so good that their kids were just really able to speak, and they wanted to.
Huh.
So yeah, I was very proud of those kids.
So it sounds like you had a really ideal job.
Somewhat, right?
No.
I mean, obviously there were frustrations.
I haven't heard any so far.
We had our battles with the regional education director, right? We would have those
Over what?
periodically.
If your co-teachers are happy, if your students are happy, then
I don't know. I don't remember what it was we would get into disagreements with him, but somehow or another, I remember being in disagreements with that regional education director.
did that regional education director call you into the office and say, "All right, I want you to explain this"?
I want to say there was one time we went to his cabinet, his office, to talk to him about this, about something that we had done. I can tell you that my giving people zeros when they didn't do a lesson was not appreciated.
What are you supposed to do?
Well, in reality, the numbers go from 1 to 5. So I guess I could have given them a 1, but they didn't want me to give a 1 either. Because it looks
So
bad.
make something up? They don't turn it in and you write 2 or 3?
Sometimes this was a conversation that was had. My counterparts would never say that. My counterparts were, they wanted everything to be exact. But yes, in different groups.
Your counterparts would put down whatever they wanted.
No. With me, in my classes, absolutely not. They were as honest as could be. Right? Ma Bluda especially, right? I spent every day with her. She is still one of the most honest people I've ever met in my entire life. But my entire crew was really good, really honest people. We did have to, deal with parents that were unhappy that we were giving them these grades. And a lot of the times, some of these would come from the 11th grade kids. In Uzbekistan, the former Soviet Union in general, by the time you're in 11th grade, the only thing you're thinking about is taking your tests for your college. And so what they'll do is they'll get into what is called a podkurs, which is a preparatory course for college. And they spend every single night learning from those the tests that were in those preparatory courses. So they don't, by the 11th grade, they don't care what they're doing in school, because that really doesn't affect them as much as it does there. And so a lot of the challenges that I had was with my 11th grade class.
11th grade is the terminal grade in
To the last
school.
grade, yeah. When my wife is from the former Soviet Union, she's from Azerbaijan. When she was in school, I think 10th grade was the last grade that you went to. But then I think they added another grade after the Soviet Union fell, and so they're 11 now.
Okay. Were most of your students headed to college?
A lot of them would go to college or to technical school, what we call technicum, right? So they would go to either the college or the technical school. Lots of times when you went to a technical school, you would leave, I think, earlier than the 11th grade. So maybe something like 9th grade or 10th grade, you'd end up going into the technical school. But the ones that stayed in, they would go to to the university, one of the universities.
And when you say technical, you mean like plumbers and
Yeah, something along that.
service people?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Were most of the, it sounded like most of the teachers were female, if not all of them.
All of my teachers were female. Yeah, anyone that I
So,
worked with.
teaching is a good profession if you're a woman.
It definitely was, right? There were some men who were teachers in the school. I think the chemistry teacher was a man, if I remember correctly. I know that my host family is going to see this at some point or another, so I hope I'm not making any mistakes here. But we did have a few teachers that were, the music teacher was a man, the military teacher, because we had what was called military education. And that was a man. The what was the other one? Sports teacher was a man, and then Mechnat Kash, labor, the labor teacher. Don't ask me what goes into a labor class. I have absolutely no idea. But it's something left over from the Soviet Union. They had in the Soviet Union they had a class that was called Trud, which was just labor, and so they would teach them something about working, I guess.
Could it be indoctrination?
Everything in the Soviet Union was indoctrination. There was nothing in the Soviet Union that wasn't indoctrination.
But we're not talking about the Soviet Union anymore.
Former Soviet Union, many of these things were just kind of left over. Right, the education system, it was a very short time after the Soviet Union had changed. They didn't have enough time to change the entire education system. And so they were dealing with a lot of these leftovers. Now, I don't know whether they still have it. I didn't ask the last time I was there. I would say that the military class is probably still there, but I'm not certain that the labor class is there.
Mm-hmm. What were your goals as a teacher? Did you have goals?
My individual goals?
Yeah, your individual goals.
My individual goals was to give as much information to these students as possible and to spend as much time helping them as possible. I spent from morning until late afternoon until class ended. Like about 2 o'clock or so was when class ended, I think, at the school. And then after a while I created an English language center that my family and friends were sending over English language resources, materials, and I put those in that center, whether it be newspapers or the Far Side was something that my students loved. My family loves the Far Side.
Could they understand that?
Comic strip,
that kind of humor?
And so, yeah, they understood it. They loved it. Sometimes it needed some explaining.
Yeah.
But I had these calendars that every single day you would tear off, the Far Side, one Far Side, and then the new would come up. So I put those in the English Center, and my students, anytime we had it open, which was probably once, twice a week or so, would follow me in there, and the first place they would go was to that Far Side calendar. And they would rip off the ones that had passed, and they'd say, "Can I have this?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And we'd talk through these Far Side calendars, and that was a way for them to learn. Right? Yeah.
Did you ever ask your friends to send you comic books or magazines or anything like that?
Comic books, no. We didn't have magazines. We had lots of books. I believe that there was a Calvin and Hobbes that made it also. So I had the book of Calvin and Hobbes. I think that ended up in the resource center at one point. My family, what they did was they would send me, back then, Thursday nights were the greatest television ever. Seinfeld, Friends, etc., etc.
So you had a TV where you were?
I did not. My parents would send audio cassettes.
Oh.
And so I would listen to those audio cassettes, and when I was finished with them, either they'd be passed around the Peace Corps volunteers in the region, or they'd end up in the center. And my students would listen to those audio cassettes and basically learn English from Seinfeld. So I had lots of sarcastic students.
Oh, I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
Huh. What about your testing? Was that really important to you, that you have a test, a set of tests that would show that they were either improving or they were not?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of testing and doing it in a way that is outside of my own interpretation.
Documented.
Right? Yeah, it had to be, we had to be able to show they got this percentage of answers right. And we would count off for spelling. We'd give them a little extra point for spelling. So each question would be, let's say, 5 points or whatever. If they got the right word but didn't spell it right, all right, well, we'd give them a certain number of points. But yeah, everything that we did was documented. That was a new thing that we were doing there. And again, my host mother / counterpart loved it, as did the others. And I think they continued using it somewhat. I don't know if they completely used it after I left, but I think they continued using it.
So that's something that you introduced to them.
We'll say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Mavluda can tell me whether I'm right or not, but yeah, I think so.
Now, what did you learn about teaching from them?
Well, the way that they were teaching grammar, right? I learned a lot from them about the way they were teaching grammar. I learned how to handle a class from them. I didn't learn teaching, right? I graduated with a degree in English. I can tell you what a poem means.
Yeah.
So the actual learning how to handle a class, that was them. Every single bit of it.
And they were very adept at it.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Without being dogmatic or doctrinaire about it.
I mean, it was just, how do you control them, right? How do you get them focused on their task?
Yeah, but there are some who get control and maintain control because they're tough.
Mavluda was tough, Zubaydah was tough, but they weren't dictators, right? Their kids loved them. Even now, I'll talk to my students online on social media, and they will tell me how much they loved, each of the counterparts that I had, and how they missed them, and if they want to go see them, and things like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, they weren't dictators, but they were authoritative. Right? There's the parenting styles where you've got the authoritative, authoritarian, and the friend. And they weren't authoritarian, but they were authoritative, right? They were able to talk to their kids, but at the same time, they were the adult, the responsible person.
And I guess they were fair and not playing favorites.
Oh yeah, no, they were very good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like almost an ideal teaching situation that you had there.
Again, somewhat, yeah. We had our frustrations, and it was usually with broader
with
system.
The ones above you, right?
with the system mostly, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But my teachers were really good.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think that the people above you became more flexible? And I'm not just when I say you, I mean not only you, but your counterparts too, became more flexible as a result of the fact that their students loved you guys and they were learning?
No.
What's the point?
And I don't think that after I left, the people higher up made any changes based on it. But because we were the Peace Corps, because they felt that this gave their school extra opportunities. Again, 3 or 4 of my students went to the United States on exchanges, right? So having this ability to have an American there teaching, you put up with a lot of stuff. So it wasn't necessarily that I was getting through to them and was, the great person coming in and changing the way they saw the world. It was they got something out of it that they needed. a school that had students go to the United States on an exchange, or a school that had students that went into a good university, that was a school that was well known. And the director of the school or the regional education director, they would move up. So I would say, it's more of a, what do I get out of it? Normal agency, right? The normal things that each one of us, decisions that each one of us makes when we're in a situation. And that was how they made their situation.
Was there a point in the year, in the school year there, that they had breaks like they do here?
Yeah, we had
Extended
winter
breaks?
We had winter break.
And what would people do? What would you do during the winter break?
I usually just hung out at the house.
How long was the winter break?
I think we had about 2 weeks for a winter break, if I remember correctly. But here's the thing. So I was there during the period in which the Uzbek government was forcing students to go to pick cotton.
Really?
Yeah, this was also a holdover from the Soviet Union. What would happen is, because Uzbekistan was so reliant on cotton, that they had to get all of this out to be able to make money for. And all of these students that I had, except for some of the main cities, most of the students would go out and pick cotton. Between late September maybe, until about November. So about a month or so, most of my kids were gone. And they were out in the cotton fields. The international governments, the international organizations were putting pressure on Uzbekistan to change this, and since then they've purchased a lot of combines, and so it's not students picking, but it's combines that are picking. The thing was that hand-picked cotton was worth more money than that picked by a combine, and so they wanted to have more hands out there. But I think they're now able to get more people, adults out there to pick some of the cotton as well as some of the combines, and so I don't think they force the kids to go anymore. But back then they did.
Did the kids complain to you when they were going to be going out and picking cotton? Did they say, "Look how unfair this is. I mean, treating us like we're slaves"?
Some of them might have said that, but in truth, many of them didn't want to be in school.
They'd rather be picking cotton?
And they were very rarely picking cotton.
Oh.
Some of them would pick, lots of them would just kind of sit on the side or pretend they were picking. It was well known that people would put rocks in their bags because they had to pick a certain amount of cotton.
Yeah.
And so they would end up putting rocks into their bags so that it would look like they picked the proper amount of cotton. So yeah, there was a mixture. Some of my students were happy to get out of school, didn't want to be there. And then there were others that were like, they wished they could. There were some kids that, for some reason or another, were able to stay behind, and I did have classes during that period, but not all of my classes.
So you had to be there to teach
in the
those classes.
Yeah. It was a lighter load than it would have been the rest of the year, but I did have some classes during that period.
Okay. But there were times when there wasn't any school.
Yeah, and that was summer and then the winter holidays.
In summer, did you say?
Yeah, summer I had 3 months off every summer.
3 months off?
It was nice.
Did Peace Corps want you to do something with those 3 months?
We did a little bit. So we would, the Peace Corps volunteers, when we could, we put together an English language camp, a couple of them. We would get money from what was, I believe, USIS at that time, the United States Information Service. Yeah, it became the Public Affairs Department in the embassy after that, but at that time it was USIS. So we would get money from USIS, and they would allow us to do 2 camps during the summer, about a week, maybe 2 weeks during the summer. And we did one in a place called Chirchik, which is in the center of the country, and then we did one in the Fergana Valley, and different kids going to that. So we would have interviews for the kids to be able to make it into the camp if you had the language skills, then you were able to go to this. If you didn't, then you couldn't go. So we ended up having, I want to say somewhere around 200 kids. There were a lot of us, a lot of Peace Corps volunteers who were working as a part of this during the summer.
Who made up what you were going to be presenting during these camps?
We did.
You did?
Yeah, we worked
You
together.
got together and...
Some of them were like, sports skills. Everything was done in English, so it was completely immersion. So it didn't matter what you did, as long as you're talking to them.
Yeah.
And so some of us did sports, some of us did, macrame. Whatever it was you were interested in teaching, that's what you taught. Yeah. And then, of course, we had some classes where they were just specifically, language classes. But the vast majority of things were just getting the kids to talk through activities.
Because conversing is what language is all about, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you can't converse very well, then you may know 1,000 words, but so what?
Right. Yeah. And so this was just to bring them into a situation in which they could use those words at every moment. Right? And we were constantly talking with them, and so they were, completely immersed in the language.
We got a cohort of students who are very good at it, just naturally very good, very adept.
And good teachers.
And another that's, no, I don't get this. I don't know. Why is it like this? It shouldn't be like that. It has to be like this. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? How do you deal with that other cohort?
The different students?
Yeah.
I didn't have many that were out and out fighting against me. What I had most of were students that just had a hard time. And those students that had a hard time, we would work with them. And it didn't always work, right? There was one person that I had, she was the sweetest student in my 7th grade class, I think it was. She had such a hard time. But we worked with her and we tried to focus on those things that she was learning. And by the end, I think she did a little bit better. She wasn't the best student in the class, but she got a little bit better. And so we didn't have many that were fighting against us. 11th grade, maybe a little more. But again, they just didn't want to be there, and so what they ended up doing was just not doing their homework. It wasn't as though they would argue with you, because that's not really part of the culture. You don't argue with a person in authority, you respect that person in authority. So you just accept what the person in authority says, and you don't do it.
Now that's the Soviet Union culture, isn't it?
I would say it's part of it, sure, right? If you stuck your head out, it was going to get cut off. And so that probably fed into the Soviet system and then into the post-Soviet system.
So the Soviet system really had infected their own system.
Yeah, well, there was not much of a system prior to the Soviet Union. This is an area that had been, the empire had spread into Central Asia. Central Asia was a few different khanates. So they were run by khans, or khan. So you had the Bukhara Khanate, you had the Fergana Khanate, you had the Samarkand Khanate, you had the Khiva Khanate. And this is in the 18th century and into the 19th century. So they all became part of the governorate of the Tsarist government. But you didn't have a whole lot of public education and things like that, so there was no system. The system started to come in with the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union didn't infect, it created.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There
That's
was
good to know.
Prior to that, there was a little bit of education going on. There was a group called the Jadids, the Usul Jadid. It's the new method, right? That's the meaning of Usul Jadid. And they created some schools, but they were very small, didn't have as much reach, mostly for the wealthy. And then, of course, the religious schools were also there prior to the Soviet Union. But really, public schooling was created by the Soviet Union. And so everything that came out of that was from the Soviet Union.
Now, when you weren't teaching, when there was a break, Did you use some of this time to go exploring?
Yeah, well, inside the country and outside the country.
Both, yeah.
Inside the country, my friend, let's see, it was Scott and I think, that went to Khiva, which was one of the other major old cities, again, somewhere around 1,500 years old.
In Uzbekistan?
In Uzbekistan, yeah, we went to visit there.
Because it was old and storied and...
Yeah. Just beautiful. Now, we didn't have much of a reason to leave because ours was an old area and just a fantastic city that we were next to. So lots of times we spent in Bukhara itself. Our last year that we were there, John and I decided that we were going to make a movie parodying our entire time there. And we called it Qiyamat Khozr, which is literal translation of Apocalypse Now. So we had our own little Kurtz, this person who, according to the story of the Heart of Darkness, Kurtz has become a native. We had our own person in Peace Corps who was so well adapted to the society that we decided this guy, and he was a friend of ours, so we decided he was going to be Kurtz. And so we made a movie in which we went from John's house in this little, he was in a town by then, all the way across the country into the Fergana Valley, and found this guy, John Anderson, who was, again, like I said, an incredibly well adapted person in the program, and so he was our Kurtz, and he just gave us the most brilliant monologue at the end of it. But yeah, so we went through it, and we just made fun of our entire time there. We started out. Well, you know, it's summer, and there's no Peace Corps camp because that summer we didn't have Peace Corps camp. We didn't get the money for some reason or another, and so John and I were saying, "What in the world are we going to do?" And then I said, of course, well, you know, we can do lesson planning. And John says, well, and you know how much I love lesson planning. So we hated it. It was necessary, but we hated it. So then we decided to...
How long was this movie?
It was a full 2-hour movie.
A 2-hour movie?
It was a 2-hour movie. We went to all of the different people that we knew in the Peace Corps, and we put them in it. We even went into the Peace Corps office and had some of the people from the Peace Corps office into it. Periodically, like maybe once every couple of years or so, we'll watch it again. It's idiotic, but it's hilarious.
Does it have credits?
It does. It was we had this toilet paper, and we lit the toilet paper on fire, and it said, you know, it was a Judah Kamral production, which is a very poor production, right? That's what the name of it was. And then written, directed, acted by Kerry and John, just the entire way down this toilet paper. And obviously the toilet paper was symbolic because we were ill the entire time.
Yes. What a great idea.
Oh, it was so much fun. My host family got into it. We had this one scene where my host sister's son, who looked exactly like my host father, just a miniature version of him, we had him sitting there. Oh no, we had my host father sitting there in these sunglasses, and then we cut off the film, and we put the little, you know, my host sister's son in there with the sunglasses on, and he's just babbling because he's just tiny. Looks exactly like him. So it looks like my host father turned into to this little kid. Oh God, it was fun. It was hilarious. We had a blast.
Was there ever a point in the 2 years that you thought, I just feel like hell? I always do. I had to leave.
I don't think I ever said to myself that I needed to leave. There were some low points. I left my host family for a little while just to see what it was like to live on my own. And
there wasn't an argument or anything that led to
I left
that?
my host family. So I lived on my, because everybody else lived on their own. I lived with my host family most of the time.
Did they make your food?
We did. My host father and my host mother was very often teaching at night in one of these pot courses that I told you about, the preparatory courses.
Right.
And so my host father and I would be left at home, and I'd be reading or something, either inside the house or out in the garden. And he would come out there and he'd look at me and he'd say, "Ужин нужен, не нужен," which means, should we make dinner or not? And I'd say, it was required of me, right? I knew that there was only one answer. Yes, we should make dinner.
Yeah. Meaning you should make dinner?
He and I would make dinner, whatever it was. And so we would make dinner so that when Mavluda came home, well, we would eat, and then when Mavluda came home, she'd have something to eat too.
That was very nice of you guys.
It was expected. And but my host father and I, we had a blast. We would sit there and he would play a card game called Durak, which literally means fool. And I'll be honest with you, I'm such a fool that even today I have a hard time understanding what the card game was. We played it every day, and I still can't remember how we played it. But yeah,
was it because you were drinking while you were playing the card game?
Never drank while I was in sight. I would have a beer with my friends when I went into Bukhara. But I never drank while I was in my sight. I only did maybe twice. My best friend at the school got married, or it was either him or his brother. And I went to his wedding, and I said, and John went with me, and I said, okay, I'll drink for this. It's for this. And so we ended up drinking there, and that was like maybe a week before. And then another time I drank there, my host father and one of my students' fathers said to me, to understand Uzbekness, right, the existence of being Uzbek,
yes,
you have to get completely drunk once. There were 3 of us. We had 3 bottles of vodka. I was ill for days.
But you achieved your
I achieved Uzbekness. Yeah. But no, most of the time, and people would ask me, right, we would go to weddings or we would go to gatherings, and people would ask me if I wanted to, and I would say, no, I don't drink. And so most often people would not have a problem with that. There was one point I was reading the Quran. So I read everything. I still constantly read. And so I was reading the Quran. So the term reading the Quran can mean studying the Quran, which can mean that you're wanting to convert. Mm-hmm. So lots of times my host father, if we went somewhere and somebody asked me to drink, he would say he's reading the Quran. And they would say, oh, okay, no, I won't do anything. So that kept me from having to drink a lot of the time.
Uh-huh.
I could not keep up with some of these men that drank in Uzbekistan. They were very good drinkers, and I didn't drink that much. Come from Oklahoma, right? It's not a big drinking area.
Well, it is for some people.
It wasn't for my family. My family was Baptist, and
so you weren't into drinking even when you went into the Peace Corps.
No, I was not a big drinker. I'll drink.
And there was no pressure for you really to become a drinker.
By the host family or by the locals?
By anybody, yeah.
No. I mean, they would ask me to drink, and if I said no, they were very good at letting me not.
Now, women are not drinking at all, are they, in Uzbekistan?
Some women will drink wine. Women tend not to drink vodka, but women will periodically drink wine or champagne, but rarely. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, yes. What about any romance you might have had during the 2 years?
I didn't have a whole lot of romance. I had some people that I was with for a short period of time, but no, I didn't have a big romance. I had friends who did. My friend John married one of the women from Uzbekistan. Is still married to her. I can tell you that most of the people that I am friends with have ended up with somebody from the former Soviet Union, or were at some point about to end up with somebody. My wife is from Azerbaijan. John's wife is from Uzbekistan. I have another friend, my friend Graham. His wife is Russian, but I'm not sure where she's from. She could be Russian anywhere in the former Soviet Union. So yeah, we've all ended up with somebody from the area.
How and when did you meet your wife?
I was at Indiana. I was studying Central Eurasian Studies.
So you returned?
I came back to the U.S. I was studying for my master's degree. I was planning on getting a master's and then going on for a PhD. And so I met her there. She was a visiting scholar from Azerbaijan. She was studying, at the time I think she was studying, I want to say that it was pre-Islamic myth in Islam. So these pre-Islamic myths that would make it into Islam. And so she came to Indiana for that. And I was working for what was called the Inter-Asian and Uralic National Resource Center, still there. And we would work with a lot of the visiting scholars who would come. And so I met her at a conference, despite the fact that we had classes together. I really met her at a conference, and our romance burgeoned from there.
How long have you been married?
23 years.
Yeah.
Children? We have one son. He's now studying at Maryland, University of Maryland, in economics.
Very good.
Yeah.
So I'm also interested in what you thought you'd do when you're still in Uzbekistan, but your time is growing short. Did you give any consideration to extending, first of all? And then second, if you did not, what did you think you would do next?
I was ready to come home. I knew I was going to graduate school. The question was, what was I going to graduate school for? It would have either been continuing with English, or it would have been going back for Central Eurasian Studies. And so I decided that Central Eurasian Studies was the one that I was most interested in. I wanted to focus on the politics, culture, and literature of the country. And so that's what I wrote my thesis on.
What did you think you would be doing with that?
I wanted to be a professor. That was my goal.
And you would teach Central Eurasian culture?
Yeah.
And history?
Yeah. I figured it might be something that would be dealing with either comparative lit, or would be something in the political science area. Or if I got lucky, I would teach at a Central Eurasian Studies department, which there are a few, about 5 in the U.S.
And where is this? In Indiana?
The one that I was at was in Indiana. Yeah, there's one at Harvard, there's one at the University of Washington, there's one in Michigan, I think. And I think there's one more, but I can't remember where it is.
But yours is at the University of Indiana, is that
University
right?
of Indiana.
Bloomington?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Heaven on earth is what Bloomington is.
Oh, I haven't heard that
It was
before.
wonderful. It's the most. It's just like a paradise in the middle of this
Indiana.
area. Yeah, you wouldn't think it.
No, I wouldn't.
Paradise.
Well, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. Huh. So, what do you think was your main accomplishment in Peace Corps?
Getting through.
You wouldn't believe how many people say that. Almost everybody says that.
Yeah, that's the main one.
But it doesn't sound, Kerry, like you were struggling at all.
We all have our struggles, right? We
I'm not hearing them.
tell our stories in certain ways, and this is my way of telling a story. We all have our struggles, right? I was ill for 2 years. There's no other way to say that other than struggle.
Yeah.
It was frustrating because you had to deal with the political system, right? You had to deal with the corruption that was there, right? We were nervous when we would go to a different place because we thought we were going to have the police ask us for our kartochka, our card that we had. We didn't have a passport. We passed through Turkmenistan going to Khiva, and we didn't have a passport. We were scared to death that we were going to get thrown in jail because
Wow.
we were passing through Khiva. We had friends who were detained on that same trip in Turkmenistan. But because we didn't have a passport, we had no way to deal with this. But we did want to go over there. That's the train is the only way to get there, and it passes through Turkmenistan. So you're in fear of these things. You're dealing with the fact that trucks or buses that you're on are breaking down at any moment. Right? We were doing our movie that we made.
Yeah.
We were going up to Tashkent on a bus from I can't remember whether it was Chitchik or somewhere else. But on the way there, our bus broke down, and so we were stuck on the side of the road for hours. These are the kinds of things you deal with.
Were you afraid, though, that some group of people would come and demand your money, steal from you? In situations like that, when you were out and away from your home, from your town?
First of all, I think because I was 23 years old, you don't think about these things, right? So no, not so much while we were in country. When we were traveling outside the country, we did. There's Azerbaijan had a joke at one point. We don't have a racket. We have the police. Right? So in Uzbekistan at that time, we didn't have a racket, we had the police. And so you weren't afraid that somebody was going to steal your money. You were worried that the police were going to come and demand your money.
Demand your money?
Yeah.
For what? Just a shakedown?
Whatever, yeah. There was one time when my wife and I were leaving Uzbekistan, the border guards were trying to shake her down for money, just for leaving. They wouldn't touch me because I was an American, and she wasn't an American at the time. But they would try to shake you down for whatever money they could possibly get.
Huh.
Didn't always happen, and honestly, I don't think it happened too many times for me, but it did happen for some people.
But you stayed in your town most of the time,
in my
right?
town, yeah.
You weren't going to get shaken down there.
No. Everybody knew me in my town. There were annoying things that happened, right? For about the first month or two, a girl was calling on the phone to our house every 10 minutes or so, saying the strangest things to me and my host family, annoying us. So that happened for a short period of time. We never figured out who it was.
Who it was?
Yeah.
Huh.
A kid, more than likely, right? So those kinds of irritations. I was called into the SNB, which is the successor to the KGB at one point. So I was telling you that I lived apart from my family for about 2-3 months or so. The reason I came back was because I got robbed. Well, not robbed. Somebody stole stuff out of my house while I was gone. So burgled is probably the best way to say it. So we called the police. We called the regular police. Well, the regular police showed up, and then some other police showed up, and then the SNB showed up, the successor to the KGB. They then ordered me to come to the KGB office there in our town, SNB office. And I was a bit concerned that I was going to have a problem with that. Luckily, the director of the program, Zoya, who I had mentioned earlier, was coming into town at exactly that time. So she was able to go in with me to the SNB's office. And John came with her, and John decided he was going to sit in the back and look like he was a CIA agent with sunglasses on. So she helped me through that one. And so that was kind of one of the points in which it was the most difficult.
Did you feel like you had, like you could contact Peace Corps and they could help bail you out if you needed help?
Zoya would do anything for us. She was the best. We weren't always happy with our directors, as in the Peace Corps director in the country director. But our program director, Zoya, she would do anything for you.
Well, that had to give you some confidence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's why we were not worried about anything for the most part. Anytime we needed her, she would help us out. And then we had the three of us, right? John, me, and Scott. We were always taking care of each other. Anytime Scott saw us way more than he should have. We really spent too much time in his apartment and visiting him. But he would take care of us, and we would take care of each other.
And you kept up with one another, I'm sure, right?
We lost Scott a few years ago. He passed away.
Oh.
But
what happened?
He had cancer.
Oh.
Yeah. But John lives 20 minutes, 30 minutes from me. I go visit him.
Oh, wow.
At least once a month. Graham is now, and he's working at an embassy somewhere, I think in Cyprus. We don't get to see him often, but he'll come and visit us.
Mm-hmm.
So no, we are very close. We will always be very close. Even though we've lost Scott, he's still in our hearts.
What about people that in your host community? Do you contact them now that it's easy to do?
I visit my host family as much as I possibly can.
Physically visit them.
I went there in May. The last time
great.
prior to that I was there, I want to say it was 2013, something like that. Anytime I'm in the area, I will make a trip out to see them. Mm-hmm. So I was in Kazakhstan this April for an event that I was hosting. And so I said, all right, well, I'm going to go to Uzbekistan for a little while to see my host family. And of course, I went to see some of the community, but I wanted to focus on my host family.
Yeah.
And then I went to see my mother-in-law in Azerbaijan, spent some time with her there. So I go as much as I can to the region. If I'm nearby, then I'm definitely there.
And your language, you're adept enough to communicate.
Yeah,
very
I'm a specialist
easily
in the Turkic languages, so I speak Uzbek, Azeri, Turkish. So each of those, I can go into any of those countries and.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then I speak Russian because my wife speaks Russian to me. My ability to speak Russian is bad. My ability to understand it is good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, you're an exception. Most RPCVs have not ever been back to their.
My job takes me everywhere. I run programs, global programs for different associations, and so they end up sending me all over the world. And if I'm close, then there's no reason not to go visit.
Oh. Tell me just a little more about your company.
The one I work for right now is ADLM. It's the Association for Diagnostics and Lab Medicine. I'm the Associate Director of Global Affairs and Analytics Initiatives for them. I run our global programs, support any travel for our president or anybody who's going to different areas of the world, make certain that they're safe, make certain that we have an understanding of why we're going there, what we're doing there. Mm-hmm. And I run conferences or workshops in these different places. So we just did one in Colombia and in Zambia, and I did one in Kazakhstan.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah. Prior to that, I lived and worked here in Oklahoma. I worked for I went IEEE, the Institute for Electronic and Electrical Engineers. Prior to that, it was the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, which was in Tulsa. We lived in Tulsa for about 7 years, something like that. And then prior to that, we lived in Azerbaijan, where I ran programs for the State Department and USAID.
When did you? How long after you had completed your Peace Corps service were you living in Azerbaijan?
I finished my graduate degree and went over there right after that. My wife could not come to the U.S., couldn't stay in the U.S. because she had been here on a J1 visa, and so I needed to go to Azerbaijan to stay with her. So I moved there, worked for an organization it was originally called Project Harmony, then PH International, and so I stayed there from 2002 until 2009.
How did you like living there for
I
that
feel
extended time?
I feel as comfortable or more comfortable in the former Soviet Union than I do in the U.S.
Wow.
That's how it's really easy for me to just go there, and I understand them much better than I did when I originally went with the Peace Corps. Yeah.
And you know the language, so that makes it much easier.
Yeah,
of course.
My Azeri is 10 times better than my Uzbek. My Uzbek was good when I was there, but then I don't get to speak it very often.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
My host family, they try. They try to talk to me in Uzbek, and we talk. But the problem is that Azeri and Uzbek are so close together that I end up speaking Azeri when I'm trying to speak Uzbek. And so the words will come out wrong.
Yeah.
They put up with it, but it's tough to switch over into that other language.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you were thinking that you would like to tell me during the interview that you haven't told me so far? It just didn't, the time wasn't right or whatever, or you didn't think of it?
I don't think so. I think we've covered pretty much everything.
What about, what advice would you give to young people today who are thinking about joining the Peace Corps?
I mean, you can always give the cliches, expect the unexpected. Know that you're going to be angry and frustrated at some point or another. As I said, I tell stories in a certain way, and they tend not to show the frustration, but I spent lots of time frustrated while I was there. And everybody's going to be that way. While I was in Azerbaijan living there, I spent tons of time. Anytime you're dealing with the bureaucracy, you're going to be angry, you're going to be annoyed. Be careful while you're there, right? Always, especially if you're sent to an authoritarian country, you have to be very careful in authoritarian countries not to be able to blend in and not stand out. I would say that's probably, well, and make sure you're not going over there to help somebody. That's not the only reason you can go over there. Right? If you want to help somebody, that's great. That's fantastic. But you're not going to make as much of a change as you think you are when you go. The biggest thing that you're going to come back with is you changed rather than them changed. You're going to make some changes in some people, but you're going to be thwarted in lots of different ways the entire time you're there. So
what are the fundamental changes in you?
Well, one of the
as
things,
a result of having been in Peace Corps,
I would say that I'm much more accepting of different cultures than I was.
Sure.
I came from Oklahoma. We didn't have anything but one culture, right? That's basically all we saw.
the only one we were exposed to. There are other cultures, but we weren't exposed to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We were in our own little towns, and
Yeah.
we didn't see anything else. I was not expecting people to take me in like that and support me like that. I told you that we crossed the border into Turkmenistan when we were trying to go to Khiva. The Uzbeks protected us. They formed a wall around us, between us and the Turkmen border guards, so that the Turkmens wouldn't see us.
Wow.
I mean, that's something I was expecting when I went over there, right? And so having that experience changed the way that I look at the world, the way that I look at Muslim people. Right? We were not taught that when we were growing up in church or whatever. They were always bad in some way or another. I have a completely different view of them now.
in your view, is much more realistic than the one you had before.
I would hope so. If I went over there and it was less realistic than that, that would be a bad outcome.
Okay, well, I think that's probably going to do it. Then.
All right. Well, thank you very much for letting me talk to you.